Everyone, just going to get my screen organized here while we start. See if I can get everything worked out. Rightio, so good morning. This morning we're going to run through choosing to be a peach and quickly outlining the lemons market. But before we start, I just want to make sure that you guys can hear me. So there's a spot there up the top where you can raise your hand. If you can just do that so I know that you can hear me, that would be awesome. Cool, rightio, that's great. All right, so what we might do is we might move on and start this webinar. Right, so what we've got here is an overview on what we're going to do today. Here it is here, rightio, the next slide. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover the lemons market economic theory. So we're going to talk about what a lemons market is. Then we're going to touch on a little bit of our landlord research that kind of outlines a bit about our industry and stuff that we really should know as industry leaders. Okay, and then we're going to define, what a peach looks like as far as our businesses, and then we're going to basically have that really important factor at the end is why should we be a peach, or why is it important to be a peach? Okay, so let's just have we're going to have a quick history lesson to start things off. So there was a guy called George Enkeloff back in 1970 that produced this paper, which was then published, and he received a Nobel Prize because of it, along with a couple of other people. But what he did in this paper was actually define the lemons market. What I want to do today quickly is outline to you, an example using the car industry. He used the car industry in his paper. So what happened in the car industry was people got to the stage where they were unable to identify the difference between a good car and a bad car. So people were prepared to pay $1,000 for a good car, knowing it worked well, and it wasn't going to break down, second-hand car. So this is all around the second-hand car market, of course. And then what we're saying is that people were also prepared to pay $500 for lack of a better term, a lemon, so a car that potentially wasn't in as good condition and possibly mechanically wasn't sound. So what we found is that the dealers often knew the difference between these cars, okay, but the consumer didn't. There was no way of the consumer ever knowing what the difference was between a good quality car and, in effect, a lemon car. So then what we found is that there was a point in the industry where people kind of just begrudgingly accepted that. And people kind of started paying a bit of a median for it, and they sort of said, well, okay, we'll do this, and we're not really sure if it's a lemon, we're not really sure if it's a great car, we'll kind of pay a median. So this is where this $750 sits in front of the screen here. Then what happened is the industry actually really started to deflate, and this is where the market collapse came, is that the industry then decided, no, we're not going to put up with this, we're only going to pay exactly what we want for the car. So what that led to was that people were then pulling the whole industry down to $500. So $500 cars, crappy 500 lemons, were still worth $500. So people that were operating as lemons in the industry that knew these cars were lemon were still making money because that's what those cars were worth. However, premium cars that were in really good condition weren't able to get that $1,000 price tag anymore. People weren't willing to pay that because they didn't know whether the car was good quality or not. So this is what happened with the lemons market theory. So what happened is, in effect, that the car market collapsed on itself because of this. And it's what they call asymmetry information. That's what that means, is that one person in the market knows more about the market than the other person and are able to leverage off that. So in this instance, what we're saying is that those dealers knew exactly what was right or wrong with those cars, but there was no way to portray that to the consumer. And that way they could leverage off the consumer. And that's what caused market collapse. So I just wanted to kind of go through that a little bit. And how they fixed it is on this next slide. Let me jump over to it. Oops. How they fixed it is they offered some sort of self-regulating. So the industry said, okay, we need to self-regulate this and look after our consumers. And they started offering warranties. So that was where the introduction of compulsory dealer warranties came in. So you can buy extended warranties, everyone knows that, but every car you buy off an actual dealer has to come with a warranty. It doesn't matter whether it's Bill Blogs or whether it's a big Ford dealership or a Holden dealership, they have to provide a warranty period, and it's usually a 3-month period to which they guarantee the car. So that was one of the first things they did. They then decided to allow independent testing. So this is where all these independent RACV and RACQ and NRMA, all these companies popped up to start doing these independent road tests on cars. So dealers were saying, okay, we've got open doors and we're going to introduce transparency, and if you want to come in and actually test these cars and make sure they're okay, we're happy with that. And that was the other thing they did. And that, of course, in turn helped manage their reputations much better. So that's a quick thing just about the lemons market and how it exists and what happens. Another example of that is the Uber industry. I'm not going to wait too much about it because everyone probably has read a lot about the Uber industry and how it's affecting the taxi industry. In effect, what's happened is the taxi industry, on a different type of level, know that their consumers don't enjoy taxis, have a bad experience in taxis, and they're expensive, they're not clean. There's all this stuff around taxis. Everyone knows it's a common story, and they did nothing about it because the whole industry is regulated and they just want to look after themselves. And this is where Uber came in. So Uber was an external factor that came into the market, where with the lemons market in the motor vehicle industry, it's an internal factor. They managed to self-regulate themselves out of it. Okay, so what I want to do is just go through we did, as a company, did a heap of landlord research across Australia, broadly over 990 landlords. So what happened is that we found out that 73% of those were managed by a property manager and 27% of those were self-managed. So the theory on self-managed, and this isn't a blanket theory, but this is a kind of generalized theory, is people self-manage their properties because they don't see value in a real estate agent managing their property. They don't see value in paying the fees. So generically now, there's always those one-off owners that, you know, their son's a real estate agent or their friends renting their property or whatever it is, family members renting from, they don't need an agency. There's a very small percentage associated with that, but generally we kind of make this assumption that those people just don't see value in their fees. So what we did is we pulled out a heap of data. Now there's a bucket load of data, and we have published this data. It's in the back of our Numbers Game book, which we released this year at conference. But here's some highlight on some of that data. So what we've said here is 16% of landlords don't believe their property manager is trustworthy. Now some of these, I don't want anyone to panic about these figures. This is more about self-awareness of the industry, just to understand that, you know, what I guess the perception of a lot of our landlords are. So 16% of our landlords don't believe that their property manager is trustworthy, which is 16% is quite a high number when you're talking about trust in managing someone's investment. The next one I've got here is 26% of landlords don't believe their property manager is service orientated. So this is kind of a big one for us here when we're kind of pitching transparency and service orientated, customer centric type businesses. Is that, you know, you are a customer service business, should be service orientated, but we do also understand on the flip side of that is that the technologies available to property managers these days are probably not as such that you can't be completely service orientated. You really have to be, often in many cases, system orientated to be able to offer a generic good service to most of your clients rather than an individual service, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The one I've got here is 28% don't see value for money in the service. So this was 28% of our private landlords, of managed landlords from an agency. So what I put on the side there is, remember we said before there was 27% private landlords, and we believe a large percentage of those don't see value for money in fees. So now what we've got is we've got 28% of managed landlords don't see value for money. We've got the 27% private landlords. We've got over half the landlords in Australia that don't see value for money in a real estate service. Okay, so this is kind of a huge issue for us. This is a real awakening for us to have a look at this and say, well, why don't you see value for money in our services? And to really dig deeper into that. So again, this is nothing to panic about. This is more just about understanding what generally landlords, and remember this is only 990 people out of the few million there were, don't believe their property manager is proactive. So nearly 40% of landlords don't believe that their property manager is proactive. And what that means is their property manager just kind of does what goes across their desk or just does repairs at the property when they need to be done and isn't proactive about advising other stuff that needs to be done, advising things like depreciation schedules need to be done, making sure that insurance, you know, most property managers, and I know again this is more about the tools of the trade than the property manager themselves, just pay the insurance bills or the rates every year when they come through, every month when they come through. But if they miss one, they will never know. And that's about being proactive. Do you have systems and procedures in place to make sure that if that insurance doesn't come through, or if that termite inspection report, annual report doesn't come through, that there's a method in place to kind of trace that up and let your owner know so that you can fix it. This one here is would consider 30% of landlords in a managed environment would consider shifting. So that's kind of a really big figure. You know, we always had this figure that somewhere between 10 and 15% were always on the move. This survey has indicated that 30% of people are actually contemplating moving at any one time. So that's kind of a really big figure to say, well, they don't see the value for money in their service and they want to move to another agency. So let's just have a quick look at what peachy behaviour is. So I think that is kind of really, really important as far as what we're doing here today. So we'll spend a little bit of time on that. But it's really important not only to be a peach. So being a peach within your business is one thing. You also need to be recognised to be a peach. It's kind of like an internal reward and recognition for yourself. It's not just good enough to be a peach. You need to tell your clients that you're a peach, and you need to, I guess, put that into everything you do so that they can see that, embedded in all the stuff that you're doing. So one of the key things about being a peach, and this is, we go back to the car industry and how they rectified their problem with their market collapse, is they became transparent. So one of the things that we believe with being a peach is it's really, really important to become transparent in your business. You know, I've worked with many businesses over the years, and things like they don't ever send their owner a copy of the entry condition report, and they say, well, we don't send them to the owner because the owner will flip if they see it. Now, I don't know that that's a valid excuse not to send an entry condition report to the owner. Now, I know everyone doesn't do that. It's probably just a generically bad example, but that's an idea of transparency. If you believed that that entry condition report was true and correct and accurate for the property and you had no problems with it, you would also have no problems in sending that to your landlord. And if there are issues, fixing those issues if they were highlighted. So opening up your landlord and tenant portals, most systems, I know Rest and Console, I know those two more closely, do have landlord portals that you can actually open up, and it allows a landlord to see in to particular documents. So, you know, when you do that, it's also important that you actually put relevant documents in there. So there's no point actually saying, well, okay, we've got the portals open, we're actually going to hide these documents so the landlord can't see them. It kind of defeats the purpose of opening the portal. Stick everything in there. Every notice that you send, every lease that you send, every entry condition report, routine inspection, all that, make sure they're in your portal and they're completely visible. The second one I've got here is find a way to say yes. So I touched on this before, instead of hiding behind excuses. Now, a lot of these excuses I understand are legitimate. Okay, it is really hard to offer a customer-centric experience when you try to manage a large portfolio of properties, and you really have to design your services to be generic across the majority of them so that you can give the majority of them a good service. But there are ways, and there's technologies around now where you can actually really start identifying those services down to a smaller level so you can uniquely tailor them to each of your customers. And there's a thing on the next slide where I'll kind of be prompted to kind of go into that a little bit more. But that's the important thing, is if a landlord comes to you and wants something, don't say, well, we can't do that because our systems don't allow it, or we can't do that because our procedure is to do this, okay? In an ideally customer-centric business, you're working for them, they're your client. You know, it's not so much that, you know, I've got a job to do here and don't ring and annoy me. You know, they're the client, you need to do what they want. Okay, so the next one is be customer-centric in procedures. Actually, it's here, sorry, be customer-centric in procedures. So, and what that means is that identify what's good for your customer. And they could be little things like you have a policy in your office. Now, this goes back to a training session that Jody did a few weeks ago on bedding things into your culture. If you say you're a customer-centric business and you say you answer the phone within 5 rings, or you return phone calls within the hour, or emails before the end of day, or whatever it is, you need to make sure you have a procedure in place in your office. It's not enough just to say that you do that. You need to make sure you have the right procedures in place to back that up. And we go back to things like I was saying before. If you know that rates notice are coming in on properties, they usually come at the same time. Most offices are aware that if you're getting rates notice delivered direct, they kind of all land in one lump. is that, you know, there probably needs to be a note set up in the property to remind you. And I know both Rest and Consoles, again, the two that I'm familiar with, both have ways where you can set those reminders up, so it'll pop up as a task in Console or an action note in Rest to remind you that there's a rates notice due, and if it doesn't come, that you can get on the phone and follow that up. So it's about changing some of those procedures around and making them more customer-centric, focusing more on your customer. Updating them, particularly customer-centric businesses, about updating your owner on everything you do. If your tenant moves in and picks up the keys and stuff like that, you would actually ring your owner and say, hey, tenant's moved in, everything's great, they've picked up keys, congratulations. Same after routine inspection, you don't just stick an envelope and ring them, you stick an envelope, send it to them, you'd ring them and say, hey, just did your routine inspection day, so then everything's fine, and I'm going to jam a copy in an envelope and send it out to you, or I'm going to email it to you, whatever your preferred method is. Okay. Support your team in this mission. So this is really, and when I say your team, I don't necessarily mean this from a manager's perspective, I also mean it from a colleague's perspective, is that the team needs to be really aligned on this mission to become a peach, which means you need to support each other through it. And some of that comes right down to some of your internal things, like covering staff when they're on leave and things like that. It's not very customer-centric for a owner to ring up, find a staff member's on 2 days leave and no one's covering their portfolio and nothing gets done, and you have to say, okay, no, sorry, can't do that, you need to wait for Irene to get back on Wednesday. That's not customer-centric. So you need to support your team members in helping through that process as well. Okay. Know what you stand for and embedded everything to do. I wanted to touch on this, and we kind of did mention it before, and Jody did do a training session on it previously about embedding quality into everything that you do. So this is all about being peachy, but also being recognised as being peachy. So I've got underneath proudly advertise your KPIs. That's a really good example. If you have a really low arrears rate in your office, or you have a really low vacancy rate in your office, KPIs that the customer sees, then make sure you actually advertising. When I say advertise, I don't literally mean put it in the paper, but you could have it on your website. You could use it as part of your marketing campaign. You could even display it proudly in the reception area of your office. Our arrears rate today is 0%. Our vacancy rate today is whatever it is, 0%. So if you've got these really good KPIs, make sure you display them so that your customers can actually see exactly what you're doing. So the other one here, I've got individual service agreements, which I did touch on briefly before. So just sticking a management agreement underneath an owner and saying sign that really is 1980. We need to start being more proactive. So when we talk about service agreements, and we uniquely use the word service agreements here rather than just a management agreement, is the service agreement should stipulate exactly what the owner wants, okay, right down to the type of communication. Would they rather be emailed with everything that's going on? So Jody went through in one of the previous training sessions the landlord types, different landlord types, what different forms of communication. Trying to identify those landlord types is really handy to understand, okay, you know, they're a good client of mine, they're really low maintenance, and I can just email them whatever others going on. Or, you know, they really want to be involved in their business, they're an at-risk client, and I need to update them all the time, so I really need to pick up the phone and be proactive with them, okay? So just because you pick up the phone and ring one client doesn't mean you have to pick up the phone and ring every client. You know, the service agreement should dictate that, and you should be really aware. And every system has an ability to make notes in there, so as soon as you open it up, you can check it and say what's the preferred method of communication. But right down to, you know, paying bills, doing routine inspections, what sort of stuff, maintenance limits, all that sort of stuff should be in there and should be individualized so that you can actually service the client for what the client wants rather than giving the client the generic service that you've got as a business. And that comes back to the line underneath, which is understanding the client's needs. The two kind of fall really, really hand in hand. Proactive service, I kind of went through that right at the start when we were doing the survey results. So proactive service is about being on top of everything. I have this generic theory, and I've had it for many years. If your client has to ring you about something, then perhaps you haven't done your job properly. And I'm not talking about chasing something up, but if you've done a repair and they have to ring you and say, hey, did that repair get fixed, or did that rates notice get paid, or something like that, or, you know, when was the last routine inspection done? If they've had to ring you for that, then probably you're not completely on the ball. So it's really important that you do that. Train your landlords and become involved. I'm sorry, I'm running out a bit of time, so we'll just slide through these last couple of slides here. Why do I need to choose to be a lemon? Obviously, because lemons prosper, and lemons. Sorry, why do I choose to be a peach? Because if the lemons prosper, they'll actually wedge us out and the whole industry will collapse, which we talked about before. There are other methods. Cubby and other companies like that are actually really giving private landlords good tools to manage their own properties. And we don't want those people to take leverage and take control. So we need to push those types of people out. There'll be more technology, again, in line with the Cubby business to help managers do that. It's not about your business, it's about the industry. So you're doing this as an industry, you're not just doing this as a team or an office, you're actually doing this as an industry. We all need to pull together to make sure that the peachiness shines, okay? Now, at the bottom here, we're ripe for takeover because of this. Now, what we need to understand is we're not immune for it. We've seen it in the car industry, we've seen it in the taxi industry. Some of the strongest industries in the world have actually collapsed because of this type of behaviour. Now, it's not ripe in our industry yet, but as you can see by those landlord statistics, definitely the perception of our industry is getting a little bit out of hand. So we need to make sure we pull that back into our favour and start getting this peachy behaviour embedded right through our business. Okay, so this is the last of it. You know, it's now or never, choose to be a peach. That's kind of the motto that we're flying the flag on at the moment. Just want to mention a couple of things. We've got numbers game training. So this is based on our growth book called Numbers Game that we released this year, and it's all about the science of growth. So growth isn't guesswork, it is science. There is a science to it. We've outlined it in that book, and we're doing training. Sydney on the 2nd of August, Brisbane on the 3rd of August, and Melbourne on the 4th of August. So if you just go to our website, which is www.atmosphere.com, and look up training, you will find where you can register for those. Okay, I'm just going to quickly check before I close out to see if any questions have come through. And I think we are okay. Yep, we sort of look okay. So we might call it quits there unless anyone else has any other questions. Okay, cool. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you all very soon.